Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing great. I'm doing fabulous. And today we're on part 2 of our story, Mysteries on the Alaskan Triangle, when a man just mysteriously goes disappearing, and so much more. It's going to be a very interesting ride, this story, and I hope you're going to be on that ride with me because it's very, very exciting indeed. And I just love mystery, always have, always will, because there's nothing that beats a good old mystery. And let's get started, shall we, with part 2 of our story. I can barely wait, so let's continue. I tell you what we'll do, says Jazz. We'll wait for Rana to finish throwing up, and then I'll turn around and take her straight to the medical centre, even if it is a long journey. There's something not right about her. All of a sudden, everyone began to bitterly complain. They were feeling quite queasy. Their heads were a little blurry. Jazz began to privately wonder if everyone had caught some kind of highly contagious viral infection. And then her own husband began to have a seizure. His whole body began to quiver, shake, and jolt quite violently. So they easily took him out of the truck, laying him on the ground steadily to stabilize him, and then they gave him some water. She'd never seen her husband shake this much before, and a strange bluish spittle emerged from his mouth that rather reminded Jazz of the blue light they'd seen. Everyone was so distracted by the frantic pandemonium in the car, brought on by the rising onset of nausea that had plagued them all, along with Jazz's husband's seizure, that they'd clean forgotten all about Rana and how long she was taking to return to the truck. By all accounts, she should have at least thrown up the contents of her stomach by now and gained some measure of relief. Jazz had seen her hurriedly running over to a tall, leggy-needled tree that looked rather beaten up and bedraggled. A little way away from the truck, she'd seen her bending over her chest as if relieving her stomach spasms and finally the contents of her stomach, and that was the last sighting that she'd had of Rana. Before the occupants of Jazz's car could ponder as to her whereabouts, all of a sudden a strange thick mist rolled in, and you could see nothing. "What the hell?" said Scott. "Where did this mist come from? It just came out of the blue like that. There's something sinister about it, don't you think?" Everyone jumped into the car, waiting for the mist to abate, all describing it as profoundly odd, how a tsunami of white mist had been thrust upon them like this. It was ominously bodeful, and Jazz later described it as very creepy and not of this world, was how she put it in no uncertain terms. At this point in time, Rana's husband Scott was significantly worried about his wife, but everyone assured him she was probably wisely staying by the leggy tree, waiting for the mist to finally subside, because you couldn't see a thing. But everyone sensed that whatever was in the mist, it was not good. They felt all discombobulated and sensed as if they were being watched by unseen eyes, and Jazz was sure she'd seen an ambiguous shadowy figure moving around in the mist, but what it was she could not discern. But even as she began to doubt what she'd seen, as you do tend to second-guess yourselves when you're launched into a bizarre situation that challenges your understanding of the natural world, then as suddenly as the fog had miraculously appeared, like dry ice on the dance floor at a wedding, it had gone, vaporizing as fast as the steam from a kettle, so that you could see ahead of you very clearly. Rana's husband quickly got out of the truck to find his wife, but she had vanished into thin air, and no one could find her, although by the leggy tree where they had last observed her, they discovered a pile of vomit with blood in it, and found one of Rana's shoes lying next to the tree, looking as if it had aged 100 years in a matter of minutes, as the brand-new leather now looked warped. But Rana herself was mysteriously nowhere to be found. Rana's husband Scott was beside himself with grief. He was mortified. He believed something quite dreadful had happened to his wife, and that she'd been lightly carried off by a wild animal, as something had been in that mist. They all knew that. Once the fog had dissipated and the strange ethereal blue light had been eclipsed, then the feelings of nausea and the stuffy head feeling everyone had experienced just faded away as if it had never even existed in the first place. It would seem all the occupants in Jazz's car felt fine, but no one could find Rana's mysterious whereabouts, and her vanishing had not been dissimilar to my husband's disappearance, leaving everyone who witnessed the idiosyncratic event both confounded and completely thrown. If this unfathomable set of circumstances was bizarre, things were about to get a whole lot stranger. Soon after my husband George had vanished, I received a strange visitation from two men in expensive-looking, well-fitted black pinstriped suits that looked like they'd been kitted out by the finest London tailors, like Savile Row, as they were awfully smart, and the suits looked like they'd been made to measure. Over their suits they wore thick winter coats, very smart they were, and camel in colour, with brown buttons that rather reminded me of those Russian coats I've seen in pictures that people wore in the Second World War. They both had black, shiny, thick hair, cut short on the back and sides. Their skins were as white as snow, and they were both oddly wearing tight wraparound sunglasses in the middle of winter, so you could not see their eyes at all. I ask you, who does that? It was almost as if these two men did not want me to see their eyes at all. And I was suspicious of this at once, as the first question that came to my mind is, what are they hiding? They arrived at the cabin fortuitously, driving a powerful, really robust black SUV of some kind that looked like it was bulletproof and was something a government agent would likely drive. When they arrived at my door, my mountain dog Dallas went absolutely ballistic. He became increasingly agitated and began to growl, barking at the men furiously, without a hint of friendliness peppering his normal jovial upbeat demeanour, which was unusual behaviour for Dallas, as he usually ambled over to my guests and welcomed them warmly inside the cabin, but not this time. He viewed these two strangers in my doorway with an unbridled suspicion. When I opened the door, in between continuously growling at them, he lay down in front of me in a protective stance, like a doorstopper. One of the men showed me some official documentation, like an ID card of some kind, which looked rather official, and made me believe they were from the police or the FBI. Now, I'm not sure if they actually were. I guess I foolishly never paid much attention to these references, as they looked official and professional. I had no reason to doubt them. If, on the other hand, I had been more savvy, and expressed any reservations or misgivings, I'm not sure things would have panned out terribly well for me. You could sense these men meant business. They were abrasively businesslike and very blunt and to the point, with not even a hint of friendliness or approachability in their nature. It was like being in the presence of two very aggressive Rottweiler dogs that, although well behaved, you could sense could be potentially dangerous and lash out at you if you didn't behave right. I was so caught up in my personal grief at the time, with my prime focus being on finding my husband. So seeing official detectives at my door, which is what I believed they were at first, made me believe for a moment that these men might have news of my husband's whereabouts. Part of me was eager to know who on earth they actually were, but some cautionary voice inside me warned me not to ask too many awkward questions or challenge these men in any way, or things could become very prickly, and I'm glad to say I paid heedful attention to that still small voice. "May we come in, ma'am?" one of the men asked me. "We want to speak to you about your husband and his disappearance." My heart thundered in my chest. I was afraid of what they were going to tell me. Did they know what had happened to George? Did they have news on his whereabouts? "You need to put your dog away, ma'am. He's upsetting us," said one of the men in a raspy voice. The men appeared emotionless, with no expressions on their faces, no compassion in their demeanour. They were rigidly stiff in their approach towards me, and to say I didn't like them at all is an absolute understatement. I've never been in the company of two people that physically made my stomach recoil in disgust, as these men so obviously did. In truth, I felt as if I had crabs running around my stomach cavity, scratching and clawing at my insides. I wanted these men to be gone from my cabin, even before they'd entered it. My cautionary inner voice was willing them to just go away, to leave me alone, even if they did have something to impart to me about my missing husband. "Of course, please come in," I said reluctantly, putting my mountain dog away, who growled at them and barked. He continued to frantically scratch at the kitchen door when I locked him away. I'd never seen Dallas so upset before. He didn't like these men, who also gave me an uneasy feeling. My husband and I used to joke about how if we were robbed at any point, Dallas would lightly welcome the robbers into our cabin like old friends and say, "Please come in and take all you like while you're at it." So his startling negative reaction to these two men was insanely bizarre, to say the very least. I wanted the men to remove their dark glasses from their faces, but I was afraid to ask them to do this, and I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe I was scared of what I would ultimately see. "Ma'am, we'll make this brief. It's come to our attention you're making quite a fuss and commotion about your husband's recent disappearance." "But of course I'm making a fuss about his disappearance. That's what you do when someone you love vanishes off the face of the earth," I told them. "I want as many people as possible to know what happened to him. Don't you see? I need answers. Something strange happened to him. I want to get to the bottom of this mystery. There are so many disappearances that occur on the Alaskan Triangle. Someone needs to look into these paradoxical vanishings more, don't you think? Something's going on there, and whatever it is, it's not of this world." My last comments made the men stiffen. I could see their faces were wearing scowls that suggested they were not thrilled with my ominous words. "Ma'am, would you kindly stop making a fuss about your husband's disappearance? You wouldn't want something bad to happen to your daughter Ruth, or your son Adam, would you? But if you carry on this way, they might also vanish. Now you wouldn't want that to happen, would you?" And when the man said that, he gave me a creepy, insidious smile. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, looking from one man to another in abject amazement. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm not threatening you, ma'am. I'm stating a fact. If you keep fussing like this over your husband's disappearance, there will be consequences. You are upsetting people, ma'am. There is a tourist industry in Alaska to consider that could potentially be ruined by your ruminations that are unfounded and based on wild speculation. You have been warned. Thank you for your time, ma'am. We shall be going now." I watched the two men stiffly walking out of my cabin, in complete and total bemusement, trying to make sense of what had just transpired. Had they really just told me to stop making a song and dance about my husband's disappearance? I wanted answers. What was wrong with that? As I watched them, something profoundly bizarre happened to the two men as they left my cabin that I do not know how to explain to you, but it left me more confounded than ever. I observed the two men cautiously approaching their large black SUV, marching towards their car in a mechanical-like stance that reminded me of a pair of rusty tin soldiers that needed an oiling. Then my eyes were steadily drawn to a Titanic-sized humanoid silhouette standing between the trees, watching the men. I would have not noticed him if I hadn't recognized that there was no longer a light space between the trees. So I looked up to observe this huge burly form, covered in long flowing dark hair. As the men walked towards the SUV, the ground suddenly vibrated and heaved like a booming drum, and the creature, which I realized at once was a Bigfoot, thundered through the trees, rocketing towards the men, screaming at them at the top of his lungs and beating his chest with his fists. The scream was so ear-piercingly loud, so cloying, I thought someone had been murdered. I stared at what must have been a 9-foot Bigfoot, who was the most intimidating creature I have ever beheld. I stood there as if caught up in a strange movie that I was trying desperately to understand. Indeed, if I was sitting in the movie theatre, I would have lightly nudged the person sitting next to me and have said, "Could you please tell me what on earth is going on here? Why did the Bigfoot scream like this? And why is he so belligerently angry with these two strange men, as if he has a personal vendetta against them and needs to settle a score?" It felt like I was observing an invisible, rather unorthodox war between good and evil. If I was to personally wager a guess, these two men were unequivocally the evil ones in this fight. In retaliation, to the Bigfoot charging towards them, and his threatening approach. They tried to draw their pistols from their holties to fire at the creature, as I saw their hands moving towards their guns in an instinctive response. But it was like they couldn't do it. Their hands seemed to freeze in mid-air, so they were unable to reach for their guns. The Bigfoot appeared to have hypnotized the both of them in some way, so the men simply were incapable of shooting at the creature. The Bigfoot lunged towards the men, and before my very eyes he plunged his huge powerful fists in one of the men's faces. The impact was so powerful that the man's tight-fitting glasses went flying off his face. The neck was severed instantly. The man fell back on the ground, motionless, his head lying at an odd angle, like a broken flower head on a stalk. The other man remained frozen to the spot, incapable of moving. He didn't even attempt to run away from the Bigfoot's advances. I don't think it was fear that kept him so still, but I think he was under some kind of trance and was disabled from reacting in self-defense. The Bigfoot soon plunged his fist into his face as well, and it was like the head was hanging off the body, like a dog toy that had lost its face. The man fell backwards, as if he'd been shot dead by a bullet. Both men remained lying there, unresponsive, looking like a couple of dishevelled rag dolls. They were killed instantaneously, almost as if the Bigfoot had just been squatting a fly. That was how efficient his killing actually was. Even a bullet would not have killed with such precision, as incredulous as this may sound. When the men were finally deceased, I felt as if a tenebrific heaviness had lifted, and even Dallas, who'd been barking tirelessly from the kitchen, scratching at the door urgently, in a desperate attempt to get out, had calmed down significantly, almost as if he recognized peace had been restored to our cabin, and the threat that those two men obviously represented had been duly dealt with. I knew those men were dead. There was no doubt about it in my mind, and I wish I could say I had empathy for them, but I did not. I am the kind of person that never has a bad word to say about anyone, with the exception of those two demanding strangers who had inadvertently threatened me to stop making my husband's disappearance in the Alaskan Triangle so public. I suspect they also knew that I was planning to go on a radio show about the event. They had wanted to shut me up. Of that I was in no doubt. You would think that I would slam the cabin door, run and hide, and even call the police, but I sensed there was a lot more to the story than met the eye. The Bigfoot had disposed of a couple of cockroaches, because as insane as this may sound, those men that fortuitously visited me, I do not believe for a moment that they were human. I have yet to see a human skin so waxy, so white like that, and the way those men covered up their eyes, it was clear they were hiding something from me. I have a sense that if I'd seen those eyes close up, I would have known without a doubt that they were not human. But from the distance, when the man's glasses went flying off his face, I did see what I could only describe as a pair of bulging, bug-like eyes. In their insidious presence, I will say this: I felt I was in the company of two tenacious predatory beings. The Bigfoot threw the dead men over both of his shoulders. He whistled into the trees, and then three other massive Bigfoot appeared. They came running towards the large SUV that was parked stoically in my driveway. They were equally as massive as the Bigfoot that had killed the two men. For a moment the Titanic-sized Bigfoot stood together like four men in a coffee shop, and began to engage in an intense conversation together. It was fascinating to observe them, as without their hair and giant-like statuesque physiques, they would have been very human. They were certainly a lot more emotionally intelligent and human than the strange men that had visited me moments before. The four Bigfoot either forgot I was watching them, or maybe they just weren't bothered that I was staring at them from the doorway, with a transfixed expression on my face, as they talked garrulously among themselves, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, as if discussing something seriously concerning to them. They spoke in a strange indigenous language, one that I've never heard before. Mataki, kila katatukwani, hamasika, hila sopa, hila kitakata, ho pasa, ilati, notokolaba, ilati lakwa, ho pasana. The Bigfoot sprang into action and then carried away the SUV, almost as if it was a piece of light garden furniture. I knew at once they intended to dispose of it. The Bigfoot who'd killed the 2 dead men, that were still heaped over his shoulders like 2 skinny sacks of potatoes, looked up at me from a distance, where I was standing in the doorway, and his dark, treacle-coloured eyes met mine, and I could see how warm and kind they were. "Kola tikwana, hilasa, don't worry about what you saw," he told me in my head, in a transfer of telepathic communication. "Hima tikwana, there's an invisible war going on that you cannot physically see. The evil must be expunged." And with that he promptly glided into the woods, looking as if he was floating on air, with the 2 men still thrown haphazardly over his shoulders. I think he was intent on disposing of their bodies. Of that I was most sure. I knew better than to call the police. After all, what would I exactly say? "Oh, by the way, I thought I'd better phone you to tell you that 2 men, very smartly dressed, wearing dark suits and sunglasses, who I don't believe were remotely human, visited me at my cabin in a black SUV, threatening me not to talk about the missing persons investigation concerning my husband George. And then there were 4 Bigfoot. 3 of them got rid of the dark SUV that the men were driving, and 1 of the Bigfoot killed the 2 men. They'd probably think I belonged in a funny farm, and that my husband's disappearance had turned me into a raging lunatic. I did, of course, phone the police station to ask them if any officers had been dispatched to see me in regards to my husband, and they said to me, 'Sorry, ma'am, there are no new developments in your husband's case, and no one has therefore been asked to come and see you. That will invariably happen when we have more news in the matter.' I was left more confounded than ever. What had happened to my husband George? And why had 2 strange men, that I believe were not actually human, visited me to shut me down like this? If I thought that was peculiar, things got a whole lot stranger when Ruth, my daughter, and Adam, my son, my 2 grown-up children, that is, paid me a visit on a Friday afternoon, when I was not expecting them at all. So their fortuitous arrival at the cabin was happily received. By all accounts, you don't expect to get visitors on a bleak winter's morning, with icy temperatures and snow carpeting the wilderness in thick blankets. I had heard their truck rolling up my driveway, and when I saw its orange colour that stood out obtrusively against the white snow, I shuddered with delight like an ebullient puppy dog, as I knew the truck belonged to my son Adam, and a mother never ever tires of seeing her own children, even if they're all grown up and living lives of their own. There they were, both on my doorstep, wearing mittens, gloves and coats, and both carrying some hand luggage which suggested they intended to spend the weekend with me, which made me very happy indeed. I loved it when my children rolled up unannounced. I suspect they were worried about me being on my own at the cabin without their father being around. They knew his mysterious disappearance had not been easy on me by any manner of means. "Oh, what a lovely surprise, Ruth! How fabulous to see you today!" I said, staring up at my daughter, whose melancholic mood hit me hard. You could see she had black circles around her eyes. Her face was pinched, as if she'd lost a substantial amount of weight. Dallas raced out of the cabin, throwing my daughter off her feet. She was a slight woman, so the heavy dog could easily push her over like a light feather. She steadied herself uneasily, grabbing the door frame from preventing herself from toppling over. But once she was secure on her feet again, she threw her arms around Dallas, bending over the large dog to reciprocate his enthusiasm that he directed towards her so lovingly. "Yes, it's good to see you too, Dallas," she said, smiling at the dog warmly, her eyes lighting up at the sight of her beloved friend. "It's always good to see you, boy." Dallas let out a woof, wagged his tail, and then ran over to Adam, to receive yet more adoration from him. And he wasn't disappointed, as Adam bent over and rubbed his coat affectionately, roughing up the dog. "How are you, boy? Good to see you. I hope you've been watching over my mother for us." Dallas let out a woof, as if to say,
But of course, I'm looking out for your mother. You forget, she's my mum too."
"I never expected to see the both of you here. This is such a wonderful surprise. I'm so grateful, really I am," I said, unable to control the tears that were springing into my eyes and rolling down my cheeks that were difficult to hold back. "Now please come in, will you? You can't possibly stand out there in the cold all day. It'll be the death of you both. The good news is that not only is the wood-burning stove on, but the fire in the hearth in the living room is crackling away merrily, so the cabin is lovely and toasty warm."
"Now you're speaking my language, Mum. It's freezing out here,"
said my son, entering the cabin, followed by my daughter Ruth close behind. We were glad to have the front door closed behind us, as it seemed as if we were blocking out the icy cold weather. Ruth wrapped me in her arms and held me a little longer than she normally would have done. Her eyes were watery, and she sniffed. "Oh, Mum, I miss Dad so much. I wish he was here."
"Of course you do, dear. That's perfectly understandable," I said. "We all miss him terribly. But as I told you, he will be coming back. I feel it in my bones. Now come on in."
Adam gave me a hug, but it was short and brisk. He rolled his eyes in the back of his head and gave me an obsequious look.
"Mum, we talked about this on the phone, didn't we? I told you Dad is not coming back. When people go missing in the Alaskan Triangle, they don't exactly have a habit of making a reappearance, do they? You need to accept that Dad is gone."
"But I don't accept that, son. I really don't. And I'm not trying to be difficult, nor am I deluding myself. It's a gut instinct, if you like." Ruth looked rather hopeful. "You really think, Mum, that Dad is coming back? You think he's alive, don't you?" "But of course I do, dear. I wouldn't say so if I didn't believe it."
"Mum, this is profoundly silly,"
said Adam, looking suitably annoyed, as he took his coat off in the entrance hall and hung it up on the hook. Ruth did much the same, and then they politely followed me into the living room, where the fire was frolicking happily over the wood. "Oh, it's so lovely and warm in here," said Ruth, eagerly moving towards the fire, lifting her palms against the flames. "My hands always feel like blocks of ice when I'm out there in the cold. We've lived in Alaska all our lives, and yet we never get used to it, do we?" Finally, after I'd served my children hot mugs of chocolate, Adam began to talk about a memorial service for my husband George at the church in Fairbanks. Both my children lived in Fairbanks, and so having a church service there to remember their father by seemed a good idea for Adam, but I was not happy with the suggestion and was eager to express my objections without even holding back.
"Hold on a moment. Not so fast, Adam," I said, raising my hand gingerly. "A memorial service is for someone who is deceased. Your father is not gone. Why aren't you listening to me, Adam? Haven't you heard a word I've been saying? Your dad is not dead. I will not have a memorial service for someone that is still in life." "Mum, I don't know what game it is that you think you are playing," said Adam cautiously. "I don't find it remotely amusing. I understand and fully appreciate your hurting. We all are. You don't want to believe Dad is dead. But, Mum, he is. He disappeared in that mist. Everybody sensed there was something sinister in that mist. I believe it was a wild animal who attacked Dad, carried him off, and invariably killed him. If someone disappears, Mum, in front of your very eyes, then it's likely they met with a deadly predator. This is Alaska, Mum, the last frontier. It's a beautiful place, but we all know how dangerous it is to live here. Dad was unfortunately a victim to the dangers that lurk in our midst, and you need to accept that, to get your head around it, however hard it may be. I have spoken to the police about the case, Mum. They say you keep phoning the station and asking them how the missing persons investigation is getting on. He told me, the detective in charge of the case, that he hasn't got the heart to tell you that Dad is not coming back, Mum. He's seen so many of these cases, and they always end the same. That man doesn't know what he's talking about, dear. I told you your father is not dead. Mum, what planet are you living on? Dad is not coming back.
Will you please both stop getting at each other like this? Said Ruth, putting her hands over both of her ears. I can't listen to you both going on and on at each other. We need to have more time, Adam, to grieve before we have a memorial service of any kind for Dad. And if Mum really believes he's still alive, maybe he is. Stranger things have actually happened, you know. And Mum's always had great gut instincts about things.
Oh, please, listen to yourself, Ruth. You're talking through your head. Am I the only member of this family that actually possesses some common sense and sound reasoning? You two need to get a grip on reality. Do I really need to spell it out to the both of you, like two juvenile kiddies in kindergarten? Dad is not coming back. Get it? I know it's hard to hear. I don't like to say it myself, but it's true. I'm as grief-stricken as the both of you are that Dad is not here with us anymore. But at least I'm not deluding myself. Doing that is only going to prolong the agony for you. He paused for a brief moment, as if reflecting on his words, and then let out a resigned sigh and said, Very well. If you want to hold off the memorial service for a while, that's fine by me. But let me know when you change your mind. I've spoken to the pastor in Fairbanks about this, and he's happy to discuss the music you would like and the songs for the service, as well as the Bible passages that he will read for the congregation. I told you, Adam, I'm not willing to have a memorial service for your father yet. You're not ready, Mum, said Adam, his voice softening. I know it's not easy. I have the name of an excellent counsellor for you to see in Anchorage, if it helps, he said, pulling out a slim white card from his leather wallet and thrusting it into my hand. Her name is Dr. Aubrey Lathan, Mum. She's got vast experience behind her in dealing with people like us who've experienced an unfathomable disappearance or loss of a missing person. She'll help you to come to terms with the not knowing side of the experience, of not understanding what happened to Dad. I believe it's worth seeing her, Mum. It'll do you lots of good. I took the card from my son, thrusting it rather indignantly into the fruit bowl on the coffee table, with an expression of disgusted revulsion on my face. Look, I know you mean well, Adam, and I do appreciate your concern. I really do. But I certainly don't need to be visiting a psychologist. I'm doing just fine on my own. I'm not sure you are, Mum. I think you should sell this cabin and the land. Move to Fairbanks to be closer to the both of us. Out here in the middle of nowhere for a woman on her own is no life. Son, what on earth are you talking about? This is my life. My parents raised me in this cabin, you know, when I was a little girl. You also grew up here. It's our family home, and it's in my heart. I can't just sell the cabin and the land. Besides, I love being out here on my own. It gets lonely, I'll admit that, without your father around. But this is the only life I've ever known. I'm incredibly contented here, and that is enough for me. I won't have you, son, dictating to me what I should or should not do, and what you personally think is best for me. It's my life, and I make the decisions about it. Stop badgering Mum, Adam. You're bullying her, telling her what she should and shouldn't do. Mum's right. I think Mum is old enough to make her own decisions, don't you? Besides, she's running a productive business from home, without Dad even being here. So it's not like she's doing nothing, is it? Fair enough. You make a good point, said Adam ruefully. But please consider Mum seeing this woman Aubrey Lathan. She's very good, you know, I'll think about it, Adam. Now we can change the subject, can we, and talk about something else? Before we do, said Ruth rather nervously, I've something rather bizarre to tell you. Yes, what is it? I asked. I was in the office at work, and I got a call from reception that 2 men wanted to see me. They were in the lobby, so I told her to send them up to my office. When they came into the office, they were wearing very smart dark suits and wraparound sunglasses. Their skins were very, very white. So there we are. That is the end of part 2. I told you it's very, very exciting. I can't wait for you to join me tomorrow night for part 3. Until next time, goodbye and good night.